I don't think I will ever forget the excitement I felt hearing the high-pitched robotic screeches of the dial-up modem connecting to the internet. For the first time I was positioned next to the computer as my mother or father searched the internet looking at assistive technology products. For the next 6 months my mind and emotions were consumed by getting a system that would work for me. I spent months thinking about and imagining the perfect combination of technologies that could be used to create a communication system for me. I remember the joy and excitement of seeing all the amazing assistive technology products. It was like being a kid and being taken into a toy store and dreaming about all the toys you want. The reality was, many of these devices were simply unaffordable and completely out of reach. The solution was to buy a laptop and specialized software. This was not only more affordable, but didn't have the maintenance problem associated with the dedicated communication devices that had to be shipped back to the USA to be repaired. Almost a year after I had been for the assessment, I finally had the technology I needed. Now, I needed to learn how to use it to communicate. This took an enormous amount of time and effort. At the time my body was very frail, and I struggled to control my movements. Sitting up and looking at a computer screen was exhausting and painful. However, each day I could feel my body getting stronger and used to this new position. I have enormous admiration for my mother. She gave up her job to teach me. The months that followed, with her help and support, I worked extremely hard, learning how to use everything. At first, I used a switch that interacted with the software. The software presented me with a screen containing a grid. Think of it as the screen was divided into blocks, and each one of those blocks could be assigned a function. Some would speak a message or word, others could control the computer. I would then press the switch to start a cursor moving through each option in the grid. When the block I wanted was highlighted, I would then press the switch again and it would be selected. This was very slow, and could be frustrating to use, especially as if I pressed the switch too soon or too late, I then needed to cycle through everything again, delete the selected option, and again cycle through it. I then moved on to use a head mouse, called a smart nav. This was really cool. It was almost like a webcam that was fitted onto the computer. It shone infrared light onto a reflective dot which I had on my forehead. It tracked the movement of the dot and moved the mouse accordingly. It was almost like everywhere I looked on the screen the mouse pointer followed. I then held a switch in my hand that I pressed to click with. This was so much faster and easier to use. Learning to use my communication software was daunting, but very exciting. We needed to create the vocabulary I wanted and needed, arranging it into various grids. For example, there was a grid with food on it, one with feeling words, another with people, and so on. I was not literate at the time, so relied on symbols. We had 3,000 symbols to choose from, which may sound like a lot. However, there were so many times I'd want to say something and suddenly find I didn't have the word. It seemed easier to create grids about needs, but there is more to say than I'm hungry, or I would like to go to bed. I found this very frustrating. I wanted to be able to have a conversation or express my emotions. But it was like nobody seemed to expect me to say more than what I wanted and needed. Thankfully, as I learned and developed, I was able to say more of what I wanted. My literacy was also rapidly improving. This meant I could start typing the words I wanted using letters. During this time, I also built up a relationship with the software developers who made a lot of the software I used. I started off with a program called WinSpeak. Later I moved on to use a program called The Grid. I was one of the first people in the world to use it and ended up effectively being their beta tester, helping to find bugs and giving feedback. They have moved on to the Grid 3 now, which is so much more advanced compared to what I started with. While I still have contact with the company, who are based in the UK, I now use other software. I mostly use a program called Proloquo for text, which I have on my iPhone, iPad, and Mac. I still have my very first laptop, a Compaq Presario. Early in the year I actually got it out and managed to start it. It seems so big and heavy now, and it was amazing to see how much the graphics have evolved. But I digress. I reached a point where I was a reasonably proficient communicator. I knew my communication system and how to use it. It was wonderful. Technology had given me a voice. In fact, there were times when I would sit and say words to myself, simply because I could. Although back then I used a speech synthesizer called DeckTalk, and I spoke with an American accent. I can still remember what it was like to first share my feelings with another person. The first time I could tell my mother what I wanted to eat for dinner. I remember I was in the living room, my computer near me. I cycled through the grids composing my message, and then, finally pressing the switch one last time to get the computer to speak. I had asked her to make lasagna. It was such a special moment to actually be able to ask for something, and then get it. For a long time, I found it truly amazing to be able to share a thought, an idea, or to simply say, "Thank you." Then something unexpected happened. I began to feel, is this all there is? Being able to communicate is wonderful, however, I yearned for something more, even though at the time I didn't know what that something more was. 2 years passed, and perhaps through divine intervention I was given an opportunity to work making photocopies. However basic this job may seem, at the time it was incredible. I was so excited and determined to do it to the best of my abilities. If someone needed a copy, I was the man. This was the start of my career, and technology was key. It wasn't long before I was solving issues with computers and networks. Back then it was Windows 98 and Windows XP. My mum, bless her, also went back to the center where I was first assessed. I must admit, even though I was in my late 20s, I felt that teenage embarrassment, having a parent talk about you and boasting about all you had achieved. However, in doing that, it later led to me working there. During my time working at that center, I gained so many skills. I ended up being responsible for all the assistive technology and helping to find solutions for other people who couldn't speak. It was also here where I got my introduction into web development. I was put in charge of the center's website. With only a few basic notes about what to do to make changes to the website, it was intimidating and frustrating, especially as I was figuring it out as I went, but I really enjoyed that. I would later come to realize Microsoft front page was not that great. As my world expanded, I was presented with an opportunity to go work at the Council for Industrial and Scientific Research. It was there that I was able to really grow and develop as an IT professional. To be truthful, as much as I enjoyed working in this environment, I found it extremely stressful and overwhelming. especially as up until then, the people I had been working with were familiar with disability. Now, I found myself working alongside highly qualified and experienced technical people. It was like imposter syndrome on steroids. I learnt so much from my colleagues though. From everything from the requirements gathering phase, system design, usability, and web development. Mostly with CSS and HTML, but I also got to have a go at using Java and Java server pages. I was involved with several projects over the years I spent there, learning how to work within a technical team. My main role was as a front-end developer, with a particular focus on accessibility. I was involved in various research projects that all had a disability component or focus. I also ended up being involved with the W3C and helped run their Southern African office. One of the coolest moments for me was when a certificate of thanks arrived from the W3C, and it was signed by Sir Tim Berners-Lee.